recording the meeting, so please only turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing so. And please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. Should you have any questions throughout this evening, please drop them in there with your name and what you do. We'll try and answer them in the chat as we go. You should find the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Later on, we'll be going into some breakout rooms, so hold on to your seats and be prepared to chat to a few strangers. When we go into the breakout rooms, please turn on your video. It's much more friendly, and the breakout rooms will not be recorded, so you don't have to worry about that. In the unlikely event that we're hacked, we will terminate this presentation and our technical team will circulate a new meeting link to the email that you registered with. So this evening, we will kick things off by running through some of the highs and lows of the year, swiftly followed by our keynote speaker for this evening, the wonderful Julia Barfield. We'll be going into breakout rooms to check in on how everybody is doing, and then going to some behind the scenes updates from each of our working groups and campaigners. We'll then go into another breakout where we'll have some questions that we need answering on planning reform. And ACAN has expanded quite a bit, and we're restructuring. This also means that a few new roles have come up, so if you would like to be more involved, this will be a great chance to do so. So please consider that. And we will then finish off by heading to our virtual pub, the Bishop's Arms. So let's get to it. It's been a pretty tough year. We've been forced to adapt after COVID sent the world sideways. We've seen the immense growth of the Black Lives Matter movement after the death of George Floyd. Dominic Cummings tested his eyesight. We've had continuous indecision from Boris, and with a possible Trump re-election on the cards, finding hope has been pretty tough. However, despite all of this, the power of collective action is as strong as ever. Climate activism is becoming more and more mainstream, and it feels like we're tipping the scales towards a more egalitarian future. In the words of Naomi Klein, we can take hope that the climate crisis might just be the catalyst we need to knit together a great many powerful movements. When I joined ACAN at the start of this year, I was pretty anxious about the prospects of our industry. I'd realised that I left uni without the skills to design a zero carbon building. And the IPCC's 1.5 degree report states that we have to have halved our carbon emissions by 2030, only 10 years away. So I was pretty pissed off. But joining ACAN has changed that. Campaigning alongside some truly admirable people has given us all the confidence that we can win this battle. To tackle the climate emergency, we need collaboration, and in this network, that has really shone through. We've worked hard, and we are showing the architectural community and beyond that they're not alone. We're giving them a voice. Our collective action is giving others the confidence to do the same, and it's incredibly rewarding to see. Lockdown has forced us to step back, reflect, and we've gained a fresh set of eyes on our profession's importance in driving down global carbon emissions. And with this continued drive, we've achieved some pretty amazing things. We've expanded our geographical borders. There are now ACAN sets in Scotland, Northern Ireland, France, Portugal, Scandinavia, and the Balkans. We set up another one of our climate confession booths in Rochester Square for open house, which we'll run through a bit later on. We gave Naughty Norman Foster and partners a little bit of a run for their money, calling them out after they seemingly ignored their architect's climate pledge and declared involvement with another airport. And last week, ACAN's own steering group member and events coordinator, Eve Choi, provided the keynote for the first day of the RIBA Smart Practice Conference, dedicated to confronting the climate emergency. Over 250 passionate RIBA members joined the event, in which saw Eve make a strong call for action on behalf of ACAN. Other speakers at the conference included Anders Lendager, Maria Smith, Gary Clark, and Justin Beer, who was so convinced by Eve that he even suggested that she run for RIBA president. Eve may not have been involved this time, but we hosted a fantastic climate hustings for the RIBA presidency, in which we saw the 5 candidates hash out their policies to promote and embolden environmentally sustainable architecture. The RIBA council elections were fiercely fought, with 21 members standing for seats in London and plenty more for the other regional seats. ACAN campaigned to elect more councillors committed to tackling the climate emergency, and we're very chuffed to have landed a seat in London for Anna Webster and a seat for the South East in Duncan Baker-Brown. Congratulations to both of you. All of this moving and shaking has earned us a place on the new AJ 100 list, The Disruptors. We're in some great company alongside Resolve Collective, Black Females in Architecture, Public Practice, and Studio Bark, in the AJ's words, for challenging the norms of traditional practice. There is still work to be done, but we are getting noticed and we are gaining momentum. So take heart and keep going, everyone. ACAN has come a long way in a year. So I feel quite honoured to be introducing our speaker this evening. Julia Barfield is founding director of Marks Barfield, a member of the Architects Declare steering group, and is a long-time climate activist and environmental design advocate. She was with us for the ACAN launch a year ago, so it's only fitting that she has returned. Julia, over to you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I feel quite honoured, really. I haven't actually got a fancy PowerPoint because I didn't feel it was appropriate somehow. At the launch last year, there were no fancy PowerPoints. There was just oodles of energy and passion and good intentions and some drink. So you'll have to put up with me just talking. And in some ways, I can't believe it's a year ago. It feels like a lot has been achieved, and we've just heard about some of the things that ACAN has achieved. Now, when I talked last year, I talked about the importance of whole life carbon modelling, upgrading the existing building stock, minimising extraction and waste, and how, as architects, we need to transform the built environment to meet society's needs without breaching the Earth's ecological boundaries. And I feel that there's been a lot of movement, a lot of things have happened since then, not least the AJ retrofit campaign, Letty, and much more. I talked about the founding of Architects Declare and how we had 600 signatories of practices worldwide, including engineers. Well, now we have 5,850 practices signed up from 23 countries. And we're morphing into construction declares, recognizing that this is a collective endeavor where the whole of the construction community needs to pull together. And we now have project managers declares, landscape architects declares, contractors declares, and architectural education declares. And we're about to launch a series of 10 regional meetings trying to promote a decentralized network where every signatory practice is committed and self-motivated. And in the last year, just reflecting on the last year, Letty published its brilliant groundbreaking guide. And this was a great example of a joint architecture-engineer collaboration. And I do feel that it's never been so important for architecture and engineering to be equal partners in the drive to achieve net zero by 2030. And we architects now no longer have any excuse not to be as familiar with kilowatt hours per square meter and kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square meter as we are with pounds per square meter. And in the last year, of course, ACAN went from a standing start in the JGO with an unrivaled collective energy, and we've just heard about that. It's been very impressive. And as also has been said, even the RIBA is getting serious about the climate emergency with its declaration, the 2030 challenge, and the Sustainable Outcomes Guide, and that's really great. There's no doubt that we are collectively, alongside many organisations, building a movement in the construction industry to push the net zero. We are the 3.5% who are changing mindsets and cultures, but we cannot take our eyes off the goal or our foot off the pedal, or whatever metaphor you'd like to use, because there's no doubt that this is the most important issue of our time. And in the last year, we see the effects of the crisis around the world. The wildfires in Australia and California, and I read in my carbon briefing yesterday that the fires burned more than 4 million acres, twice as much as last year in California. And you remember that last year it was paradise that was lost, burnt to the ground. There's been floods in East Africa and Yorkshire, and scientists talking about the fact that we already may have triggered a global tipping cascade. But I want to talk about today, what I really want to talk about today is what gives me hope over the last year. And I take hope from the outcome of the UK's first climate assembly. I don't know if you read about it, but it had 108 members, representative of the UK population in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, geography, education, and social background. And over 6 intense weekends, they were informed about the climate and environmental crisis by 47 speakers. And they were tasked with setting priorities and recommendations about how to reach net zero by 2050. Well, 2050 was because it was organised by CCC, and that's their goal. Obviously, most of us think that's too late, but what was really impressive about it was that they came up with some pretty radical conclusions, supporting the frequent flyer levy, banning private jets, phasing out SUVs, transition to non-fuel travel by 2035, and restricting high carbon advertising. And they had 6 top recommendations. And what I found really interesting was the first one that they did was saying that they needed improved information and education on climate change. And it gave me, and the second one was about fairness, but this really gave me faith in the British public, because it highlights that when they are properly informed, they will make the right decisions. It also highlights the fact that the press is really, really not doing its job properly. And I think actually they should be forced to go and have a climate assembly with 6 intense weekends informed by 47 speakers. And then maybe the press would actually then do its job, because I really don't feel that they understand. I mean, the Today programme is one of my bête noirs. I just feel that they don't have that view of the world. But I also take hope from Jim Cramer. And now he's a bull market trader from the New York Stock Exchange. And he said earlier this year, I'm done with fossil fuels. They're the new tobacco, and it's happening kind of quickly. I also take hope from Mark Carney, he was on sorry. Well, I think you probably all know who Mark Carney is. And he said that there's no greater systemic risk than climate change. And obviously the financial markets don't like risk, and he's clearly very influential. So I think the financial markets are starting to get it. I also take hope from the amazing Kate Raworth and her Donut Economics, which imagines a whole new economic paradigm, a new mindset with humanity and social justice at its core that stays within those planetary limits. And anyone who's not aware of her should definitely take a look at a speech she gave at the Architects Declare events last November. She was on fire. And she's already started to advise cities. And she's already made a roadmap for Amsterdam in identifying a whole synergistic network to take for them to go to a whole new dynamic of donor economics. I also take hope from another book that I'm reading at the moment called The Good Ancestor by Roman Krasarek, who happens to be Kate Raworth's husband, which is about long-term thinking, sometimes called cathedral thinking, but it's also about intergenerational justice and how we can all become and should become good ancestors. I mean, that's one of those phrases that when you hear it, you just go, of course, obviously we all need to be good ancestors. And what's also heartening is that in Wales, they're ahead of the game, and they have the world's first future generation commissioner, which is really good. And I do take hope from China's recent announcement that they'll be net zero by 2060. And I know most people in this room will be saying that that's 30 years too late. But as one journalist pointed out, the Chinese tend to over-deliver, unlike some politicians in the West. And I think this is really a big deal. This is China's declaration that there is an emergency. and that and also that the renewable energy market has come of age. I mean, it's a first step and it's a small step, but it is a first step nonetheless. And I also take heart from Corinne Lecary, who I found out about recently. She's the climate scientist who won the 2020 Heineken Prize for Science. And she gave a brilliant TED talk, which I advise everyone to read, which is simultaneously somehow light-hearted, but deadly serious at the same time. And she said at the end of that she was totally convinced that before she dies, we will recycle everything. We will no longer eat animals. We will breathe pure air in our cities. And in her words, end the nonsense that is environmental destruction that we do today. She also said that it's down to all of us. And I think you all know that very well. It is down to us. It's down to our collective action. I also take hope from a story I heard at a climate conference I was at recently, when Arup was asked to design a new car park for Heathrow because there was peaks in demand that they couldn't accommodate. And a bright spark in Arup decided to investigate and found that the cause of this was that when flights arrived from India, it was the custom for the whole family to go and meet returning members with lots of cars. So what they did was just suggest that the flight arrivals of the Indian flights were just more spread out. And in this way, they eliminated the need for a new car park. Well, this is just the kind of thinking that we need to be doing. I mean, we've all been taught that we need to question the brief. And given the need that we dramatically need to reduce embodied carbon, the ultimate question of the brief is logically, do you really need a new building or even a refurbished one? And I suppose I should say that I take heart from Boris saying yesterday that he's going to have all our homes powered by offshore wind by 2030. I think we do need to hold on that until we get more detail. But most of all, I take heart from and hope from you guys. ACAN came blazing into the architectural scene just 1 year ago with a huge amount of monumental energy and focus, organizational skills and creative determination. And you have been brilliant, and I'm sure that you will go from strength to strength. Because as you know only too well, we need to turbocharge our response to this existential threat. The next 10 years are critical. And we need to retrofit a house every 35 seconds. And that would provide jobs for 2 million people. I'm not sure why Boris didn't mention that yesterday. After all, during the war, we built a destroyer every 3.5 days, sorry. And when I say we, it was the women that built that destroyer every 3.5 days. That's the kind of scale of response that is required. I mean, in conclusion, we all need to see the world through the lens of the climate and environmental emergency. It needs to guide all our choices, what we eat, how we travel, how we shop, whether we stand up and speak out, everything. Because it's not about having less of what we want, but rather having more of what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. That was really encouraging, and I think something that we all really needed right now to hear. We are going to do a little check-in now, and we're all going to get spilled into the breakout rooms that Ben mentioned in his introduction. When you're in the breakout room, we use hand signals when we meet with ACAN. A lot of you will be familiar with them, but if you want to make a point, you raise your hand. If you want to make a direct point to what someone is saying, you use 2 fingers in the air, and then you might have seen some of us shaking our hands at the screen, which is basically, yeah, I agree. Maybe it's not so hugely necessary in the first breakout, but in the second breakout, you'll probably need that more. And in the second breakout session as well, we'd recommend that you identify a facilitator amongst your group, and the facilitator just sort of keeps an eye to make sure that everybody who's got their hand raised is getting their opportunity to have their voice heard. Bit of radical inclusivity there. So for now, the breakout rooms, if you could just let each other know, how did you first find out about ACAN, and what's been your climate activism highlight over the past year? So I think someone's going to throw us all into breakout rooms now. Good luck.
Hi everyone. So I hope we're all back from the breakout rooms, and that yeah, that everyone had a good check-in. So for the next part of the meeting, we're just going to hear from the various working groups within ACAN about what's been happening. So I think I'm up first to talk about the outreach group. So over the past few months, we've had interest from a number of people in other parts of the world and other countries regarding the potential of setting up ACAN groups in other places. So we've been thinking about how best to kind of do this, and we've basically come up with a strategy, a kind of 3-step process that that could hopefully help to enable groups to establish elsewhere. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce this. So the first thing that we're suggesting people do is kind of gather together a core group of initiators. So essentially these are people who are willing to put in time and energy to get a group off the ground. So that could be quite a small group of, say, 10 or perhaps ideally 15 people to begin with. Once that group is kind of formed, then we're suggesting people contact us, perhaps via the email, to request a meeting. So we're currently developing various resources and kind of templates and things which might help people to establish groups. So we'll kind of run through all of that. And then the third step is we're proposing that groups plan a launch event. So this will be a kind of initial thing, like, you know, we had our launch party approximately a year ago at the Jago, and we also had the architects assembly at the building centre. So this is kind of roughly the process that we're suggesting people could follow. We're hoping that in the very near future we'll have a page on the website that's going to explain this in a bit more detail. So as mentioned earlier, we've currently got kind of groups starting up in different parts of Europe, and so it's kind of a very exciting moment, I feel, for ACAN in this respect. And you know, the aim is that hopefully we'll achieve world domination and yeah, have ACAN groups operating from other parts of the globe. So yeah, if you're interested to be involved in that, there is an outreach group. We're a very kind of small group of people in terms of active members, but if you'd like to be involved in helping to create resources for ACAN chapters in other parts of the world to help them get set up, then yeah, it'd be really really wonderful to have your involvement. So yeah, that's that update. I'm going to pass on to Alistair, who's going to talk about another group.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tom. I hope everyone else can hear me. And Tom, I'll give you a shout when I need. I've got about 4 slides, so you're happy to take me through those. So the professional standards group, well, ACAN's founding principles really do demand a new kind of professionalism. We want a duty to the public interest and the common good as our guiding light. Within the thematic group itself, we're trying to challenge existing structures, redefine codes and criteria, and encourage more engagement and accountability with codes and ethics within the industry. So far, our main action was Free Tom Bennett, the campaign you've no doubt heard about, where we used Tom's notification of conviction to arrange a gathering in solidarity outside the ARB. After that, we had a really positive meeting with Julia, myself and Tom, and Head of Professional Standards at ARB, and the chair at the time. And we were invited really to draft a letter and make some high-level recommendations to the ARB. In summary, they were that they update Standard 2 of their Code of Conduct, which is around knowledge and skills, update Standard 5 of the Code of Conduct around taking care of the environment, update the educational criteria, recognise that some architects have an increased responsibility to the planet because they're working on much larger schemes, in the same way as you might recognise that a conservation or a heritage architect has different skills and more responsibility for their projects. And lastly, to declare a climate emergency. So what happened? Well, it went quiet for about 4 months, which is often the case with such issues. But the good news is that we heard rumblings around a review and increased action from both the ARB and the RIBA. So next slide, please, Tom. So in April, we started to see headlines about a new ARB review into competency. And in August, we saw significant announcements from the RIBA on the way ahead, which is a document setting out clearer definitions of career stages, expectations on professionals, and some mandatory competencies which are coming up. The first one is health and life safety, informed by the Hackett Review and issues around Grenfell. But that mandatory competency is likely to be followed up by climate literacy, ethical practice, and research literacy. Whilst these haven't exactly been welcomed by the profession at the moment, who are likely feeling somewhat put upon with new rules and regulations and a certain amount of uncertainty as to how they'll deliver against them and how they'll be relevant to them, despite being very, the profession being so broad, I'm really sort of happy to see these being put in place. I think it's a really positive step to begin to recognise the massive responsibility we have as professionals. And I'm also pleased to announce that ACAN have a number of key figures from the education group and from other thematic groups sitting with the RIBA developing the climate curriculum. So this document, which is kind of being drafted and is coming out at the moment, is an essential way to begin to get these MAP competencies onto the desks of all architects. I've been personally involved with the ethical practice curriculum and looking forward to seeing some of that come out too. So where are we on this? Well, last week I had a brief discussion with the ARB, and I'm pleased to report that it does seem likely that the standards will be updated. The 2 standards in the code will be updated along with the education criteria. Exactly when those changes will come into place is a longer game. Unfortunately, these reviews do take an awful long time. So I do think ACAN have still got a really important role to play whilst these kind of machinations are going on, to actually get the necessary knowledge out there ahead of the game, so that when these things come in, people have already got plenty of those going on, plenty of that knowledge in practice. Can I go on to the next slide, please, Tom? I've put this in there because this is another thing that professional standards worked on over the period since I last reported on everything. This was during the RIBA elections. We worked with Part W Collective, Migrants Bureau, After Party, and others to put together a kind of a fresh set of principles for the RIBA, which cover a lot of different bases. And I'm hoping that the new councillors and the new incoming president will be paying attention to this, because there's actually plenty of really good stuff in here. Next slide, please, Tom. And then the professional standards group itself, having sort of kept this dialogue, renewed this dialogue with the ARB, are now looking at the competence review itself. So like I say, it is a long process, but we're keen to make representations. So if you're an architect in the UK, you probably got an email about a survey that closed on the 16th of September. I hope you submitted some information to that. There's now a broader call for evidence out, which is organisations who are looking to, well, the ARB is looking for organisations and relative groups, arguably like ACAN and like LETI and the UK Green Building Council and others, to kind of contribute to this, to what these competencies should be. So professional standards and the education group are currently putting together responses to that. One of our other members, Seb, then came across this government consultation, which coincidentally seems to be closing at the same time, on the 23rd of October, around recognition of professional qualifications and regulation of professions, call for evidence on that. So I think we're going to try and make a submission on that front and encourage others to push forward on it. And then the last thing I put in here is the 2019 RIBA code for the environment. You probably know that the RIBA code's been upgraded. And I think it's an important thing to kind of spread the word about what's in this code now, and kind of make sure that it's actually reported against and that people are held accountable to it. Professional standards haven't yet heard of anybody who's broken this code, but I think it's important to look at, where breaks may be taking place and say, let's make sure these codes are actually used in practice. So that's kind of the overview on professional standards. It's quite an interesting topic to me, but I recognise it's not for everybody. We are actually hiring a sub-coordinator or a co-coordinator for the professional standards group, so that will come up in the roles later, and I do encourage anyone who's interested in codes, ethics and standards to kind of get involved with this. So thanks very much, and over to the next person.
Thanks, Alistair. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a bit today about ACAN and the collaboration we had with Open House at Rochester Square this year. Just talk a bit about like how it came about and also like the design and build of the product itself. It was actually quite heartening how this came about, because one of the team of Open House this year came to us and they said, look, we're changing how Open House will be, not just because of COVID, but they want to change what kind of festival it is. And one of the key things that they were looking at was like climate change and its relationship to the built environment. And that's why they kind of came to ACAN, because they really admired what we're doing. And they also saw us as like kind of leading like kind of climate activism within the UK. So following a positive initial meeting with Naima Murray, we said, great, we'd love to be involved. Give us a venue, basically, because we had nothing of ourselves and didn't know where to go. So they put us in touch with this garden in Camden called Rochester Square. And as you can see from the poster there, like their main 3 minutes are food, clay, and garden. And it's a really fantastic space. If you do get a chance to go, please do. And check it out. It's a really interesting how they're operating in there with the ceramics workshop and gardens and chickens, which we thought it was like great for us. They gave us a clear space we could work with. And they also felt like it linked in heavily with the Where the Wild Things Aren't team, but they'll speak on their work later. Tom, if you just go to the next slide, please. So the idea that we had was for a climate confession booth, which is an idea that we'd had at our Open Architects Assembly last year and a trial at Future Build Conference. We knew that like the idea as a concept was great as an icebreaker, and it's good to get people thinking about their own personal effects and role in the climate crisis. We knew also that if we were going to build something, it had to be made out of reclaimed materials. So thankfully, due to an organization called Build Cycle, we were gifted this timber from a church dating back to 1951 that otherwise would have just been thrown away. Which obviously suited us pretty well and so definitely suited our budget. You can see some of the photos here of the building installation, which was taken place over 2 days in Rochester Square itself. In all seriousness, this really like highlighted like the effectiveness of the network of ACAN and how great it is, because all we did was reach out via broadcast and I think via like maybe a newsletter, and we got people turning up with tools, we got people turning up with well, their children in this respect was quite helpful, and also people just turning up just willing to help. I say like thanks to everyone involved. We managed to cut all the wood, put it together within 1 weekend, and we all managed to do it for like less than £100. Half of that was on an Uber getting the wood there, and another fifth of that was on varnish for Ronseal. So it really speaks to like the power of the network and the manpower it can bring. Next slide, please, Tom, for the result. And yeah, this is like the finished thing here. This was designed by an architect called Jack Taylor. Now, Jack claimed to have designed all of this within his lunch break at work. So I think that's quite interesting to see how people can take their workloads around ACAN as well. Also, you can see in the photo there, we got another ecclesiastical reference with the blue cross at the top. At the bottom also, you might be able to point out the planters there, because the idea is like, we didn't just want to dump an installation at Rochester Square. What will happen is like that has plants growing at the bottom, and then out that will eventually wrap up and around the installation, creating something quite unique and that works for the venue. It really inspired us it was a really like positive experience, just like doing things and, you know, something physical rather than digital. I know that's like not an option for everyone, but it was really like positive weekend and great day all around there. So Architects Admit, we're going to be looking to do more installations made from reclaimed materials, maybe even something as early as December. Finally, Tom, if you just wanted to go on to the last slide. What was great is like we got quite a lot of confessions. I don't think you can read any of these, so didn't really select the photographs well, and I haven't written them down either. But it was quite interesting that airplanes and plastic bottles came up a lot. Concrete a bit too, but as like a guilty pleasure. And it was just fascinating to have that feedback and have like that earnest conversation with people, and also tell people like the damaging effects of the construction industry, because people are thinking it's more about planes and plastic rather than the buildings and world around them. That's a slightly negative note to end on, but I have run out of slides, so I will now pass over to Where the Wild Things Aren't.
Hi, speaking on behalf of Where the Wild Things Aren't. So, like Bobby was saying, we were really keen to collaborate with Rochester Square as part of Open House, because the square is a really wild and messy space with productive elements in it, and more so than any other Georgian square that we've ever seen. And in terms of like, the biodiversity of the square, it's of rare value to the local community in terms of its ecology. So one of the activities that we organised for the day was putting on a workshop that encouraged the public to sketch and survey the site, and responding to the site's legal definition as a sculpture garden. So people spent time amongst the cultivated spaces and were planting things and looking at the intentional and incidental art. So the pamphlet guide and the activities that we had invited everyone that took part to broaden their idea of sculpture to include the natural as well as the man-made. So people went around and put in different kinds of their own labels for the things that they thought were sculptures. So if you go to the next slide, please. And then the workshop helped to inform a panel discussion that we had at the end of the day with Francesca, who owns and runs the sculpture garden. And the idea of the sculpture garden became a point for a wider discussion about urban green space and ecological change. So we were on a panel with Where the Wild Things Aren't people, so Kat Scott, Ben Brace, myself, and then some other people such as Farouk Aman, who is from Natural Selection, and he was doing slip casting on the day at the site. Liz Andrew, who's a local ecologist and natural historian, who was really, really impressed by the biodiversity of Rochester Square and would love to do an ecological survey with ACAN on the site. Owen Watson from 6A Architects, and then the whole discussion was chaired by Francesca Anufossi. So what was really great was that Finn Harper, who's the Open City Director, was there on the day, and we got like a shout out from him on Instagram as it being his favourite event of the day. And if you're interested in seeing the panel discussion, it will be on the Rochester Square website soon. And we'd love to collaborate with Rochester Square again as we campaign for more biodiverse and socially vibrant cities. So I'm going to pass over to Hue Fan now.
Hi. So another, just go, yeah, that slide's great. Some more updates on Where the Wild Things Aren't activities. In September, together with Construction Declares, Where the Wild Things Aren't publicised and prepared a joint response to DEFRA's proposed England tree strategy. Although the consultation itself was quite constrained in its questions, we promoted the idea of timber construction and well-managed working woodlands to give the economic basis for more ambitious tree planting. We argued that buildings lock up carbon in trees longer than other common uses of timber, and therefore timber construction is a really vital component in the role of working woodlands fighting climate change. We also argued for a greater emphasis on tree planting in urban settings to tackle issues of pollution, public health, and adaptation to future climate change. We did quite a lot of work in the background to that. So we'll be translating our efforts from the tree strategy consultation to contribute to broadening our ACAN's response to the planning white paper that's coming soon. Next slide, please. Finally, we will be organising a new LEAF event to reinvigorate the group, discuss our longer term aims, and welcome any newcomers or those who want to increase their involvement. We've penciled this in for the 28th of October, and we'll share more details soon via the broadcast channel. So we really hope to see you there, and it'd be great to welcome new members to Where the Wild Things Aren't. And hand over to the next updates.
Thanks, Betty and Grayfan. So a quick overview then from the Circular Economy Group. Our kind of high-level vision, if you like, is to push for a radical shift in the construction industry so that all buildings in the UK are designed and built in line with circular economy principles. So it's our mission to reimagine current building practices, to enable regenerative design at all scales and stages of a project, and for the construction industry to have a positive impact on human and planetary health. Next slide, please, Tom. So our group has been looking at issues like material passports, pre-demolition auditing, and other mechanisms to enable demountability and reuse. But what we've really found is that the circular economy is such a broad topic and absolutely everything is interconnected. So we need to be going much further than just thinking about material use. So systems and industries, clients and procurement, as well as policy and regulation have a huge part to play. We're beginning to realise that if we are going to reimagine the way buildings are designed and delivered, we need an industry-wide upskilling that resets kind of standard practice. So as a starting point, we've been working towards developing a circular economy CPD series, which we hope will enable architects to design with circular economy in mind. Next slide, please, Tom. So alongside this, our group's been looking at the REBA stages. Seeing as architects so often base their fee proposals on these stages, we've been asking ourselves whether each stage really does go far enough to ensure that circular economy thinking is fully embedded into architecture standard scope of work. So, you know, do we need a REBA stage 8 for demolition and reuse, for example? Basically, are the REBA stages really circular or are they actually linear? Next slide, please. So we're now looking at kind of combining these two strands of thought and structuring our CPD series around the REBA stages. So we're hoping to have 2 speakers per stage, including a stage 8. And as well as the speakers, we'll have breakout workshops to kind of really interrogate each stage as we work our way through the series. So off the back of this, we hope to develop a kind of proposal for new circular stages, as well as a really tangible toolkit for architects and designers to use to enable the circular economy as standard practice. As ever, we'd be really delighted to hear from anyone who has any ideas around this or who would like to help make it happen. So if that sounds like you, please get in touch. Next slide, please. And so finally, we'll be hosting a Circular Economy Social on Monday, the 12th of October. This will be an evening for people to kind of touch base generally and catch up on things that fall sort of outside of our regular catch-ups around the REBA stages and the CPD programme. I think it will be a really great opportunity for newcomers to meet the rest of the group, as well as anyone who feels like they've been out of touch for a while to reconnect. So hope to see some of you there. I will now pass on to Sarah for an update on the existing building group.
Thanks, Anna. I'm going to fly through this because I'm sure you're all aware that it's almost 8 o'clock and we've got lots of stuff to get through. So subtle hint to the next couple of presenters to quicken it up. So existing buildings, yes. In the summer, just as a little update of what we've done and what we're doing. We responded to the EAC inquiry on the energy efficiency of existing homes, which was a really pressured, quick turnaround of information, but there's the power of the network. we can tell you more about that if you want to come and join us in the existing buildings group. We're currently doing a couple of campaigns. We're looking at conservation planning reform and how to break down the barriers to retrofit in conservation area guidance. And we are meeting with a London borough very soon to discuss that with the various departments that are involved in that. We are talking about a new campaign about reimagining the public image of retrofit, recognising that there's a little bit of a way to go before we can entice enough people to get involved in retrofit. Next slide, please, Tom. So yeah, some of you will be familiar that we've talked about a campaign called Homeowners Declare before. You know, we've got architects declare and engineers declare and all of the other declares, which is excellent, but there's a huge swathe of the population that aren't represented here, and homeowners are part of that. This is a campaign that's actually a really, really big idea and has sort of been more than our group could handle, as well as all the other things. So if you're interested to get involved in helping that, we would love your hands on the deck. We're still continuing to support the AJ's Retro First campaign and the Letty Retrofit Design Guide, well, it's in collaboration with a lot of other parties such as Passive House Trust and the AECB, amongst others. It's a really, really exciting thing. Again, it's fully volunteer run, so if anybody's interested in that. And we're also trying to plan where to focus our energies for the future. That's it from us. I'll pass on to the next presenter.
Which is me. Thank you, Sarah. So we've got a new group. We're going to have our first meeting next week on Wednesday. Hopefully some of you are going to join the WhatsApp group and the meeting. So the aim of the group, which is called the Co-Benefits of Climate Change Mitigation, is to acknowledge and re-illustrate the socio-ecological values within the profession. We will be examining the connection of social values and community and stakeholder involvement on ecological values and outcomes to create opportunities for climate change mitigation strategies. We will also intend to articulate an exemplar that can be used as best practice precedent, looking at issues around health and well-being within the profession, design outcomes, social cohesion, inclusivity, equity, ethics, economic opportunities, and so on, which are all referred to as co-benefits of climate change mitigation. Next slide, please, Tom. So the main aims of this group will be to promote stakeholders' involvement and find ways of quantifying it. And we will be doing further scrutiny on impacts of communities on whole life cycle building analysis. We'll be also developing strategies, action plans, and understanding local priorities and problems, identifying existing resources and so on. And also we'll be working on tools to, and like I said, identify the stakeholders' involvement, and also to develop integrated life cycle analysis tools that include all three pillars of sustainability, not just economical and environmental, to have focus on social values as well, and incorporation of the research outcomes on SVIs and accreditation and certification schemes such as BREEAM, CFSH, LEED, and so on. We will be working alongside other groups at ACAN, like planning policy and existing building, and we'll be working on legislation related to these issues. We'll also be collaborating with external groups to reach the aims and strategies that we've defined. So like I said, the first meeting is going to be next Wednesday at 6 p.m. If you can join the WhatsApp group, it would be amazing to have as many of you on board. Next person, I'm going to hand it.
That's me. You can go straight on to the next slide, Tom, please. So hi everyone, I'm Ben from the Education Group, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the main campaign that we've run this year, which has been the climate curriculum campaign. So the main effort of our for this was to address the huge knowledge gap that exists in our current architectural education system, specifically regarding climate literacy. And we did this by finding constructive ways to work with tutors, heads of schools, and students to increase the much needed climate literacy in schools of architecture. and schools should be equipping students with the tools to design carbon zero buildings, protect ecosystems, and encourage sustainable living habits. But at the moment, they are completely failing to do so. Next slide, please, Tom. So we started off with an initial research period, which revolved around data gathering and looking at existing surveys, but also doing some of our own. And the results, as you can kind of see here, hopefully, showed us the dire state of the climate literacy within our education system at the moment. Next slide. And yeah, as you can kind of see here as well, it became very clear to us after a while that students and tutors alike are not being given the time, management, or resources to increase their understanding or abilities in relation to the climate crisis. So, next slide, please. So in response to these findings, we launched phase 1 of this campaign, which is an awareness and letter writing campaign, which focused on making an initial demand to all schools, which were to insert all 3 of ACAN's main aims into the DNA of course structures. And those are decarbonisation, ecological regeneration, and culture change. And we had some really good engagement following this, actually, and a whole network of student climate groups suddenly popped up all over the country, really happy to engage with us. And we got about 100 letters sent to heads of schools using a template that we created and made available for students to download, which had our demands in it. Next slide, please. And then we implemented phase 2, which built on the hype we generated and looked to start finding constructive actions to the solutions to this problem. So we ran a series of workshops with tutors and heads of schools that used ACAN's existing engagement ethos. Just like the meeting that we're in tonight, experts were invited to speak to inspire participants. Breakout rooms were used to explore creative solutions that could be used in schools. And then follow-up information and tools were sent out to participants after their participation in these workshops. And we ran about 3 of these. We've got some more workshops planned as well. And we're hoping that we can do some repeat workshops as well to get past participants back in the room to build even further on the great ideas that we've started to explore in how we might get more climate literacy into schools. Next slide, please. And so the final stage that we're working on now concerns creating outputs from these findings and talks. So these include an ACAN toolkit for tutors, which is soon to be released, which aims to be an easily understood and shared manual on how to immediately increase the climate knowledge in any tutor's brief. We've also got a video project on the way that works to highlight and explore the student experiences that we gathered during the initial stages of the campaign by talking to students. And we're also in talks with the RBA/ARB with 1 or 2 exciting things in the works there as well. And most importantly, ACAN's growing network of student climate groups is now very active, I'm happy to say, with much knowledge sharing and talks already underway. Shout out to UWE and Queen's Belfast for having us to speak only in the last couple of weeks at their institutions. So looking into next year, we're starting to turn our attention to the issue of diversity and inclusion as well within the industry, with the mantra of climate justice equals social justice. We want to examine the idea of access into the architectural education system as the main cause for inequality and discrimination that many of us witness in the industry every day. And if you're interested in anything I've said, particularly that last bit, please feel free to join our team. We have weekly meetings every Monday. There should be a link hopefully posted in the chat at some point where you can join the education WhatsApp. And yeah, we'd be delighted to have you all. We've got quite a few members already, but the more the merrier. And I'll hand over to Sarah, I believe, is going to talk to you about planning policy. Or embodied carbon.
It looks like it's me. Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm one of the coordinators of the Embodied Carbon group. So what do we mean when we say embodied carbon? So embodied carbon is the CO2 emissions associated with the building's materials, construction, maintenance, repair, and end of life. Now, as we reduce operational energy and decarbonise the grid, this is becoming a bigger and bigger slice of the building's CO2 footprint. But at the moment, embodied carbon is not really regulated in the UK at all, except for very large schemes under the London Plan. So what are we going to do about it? Next slide, please. So the Embodied Carbon Group recently has responded to the government's consultation on approved document F and L, saying that we think that embodied carbon should obviously be included in those documents. We've also run a safe structural timber campaign, where we consulted with the timber industry and structural engineers to campaign to make safe structural timber exempt from the combustible cladding ban. Next slide, please. So our overarching aim is that embodied carbon needs to be understood in the context of whole life carbon, measured, reported and capped, and then eventually reduced to zero. Next slide, please. So right now we're working on the case for embodied carbon regulation, which is a document that's going to really clearly spell out why we need to regulate. We are also researching how embodied carbon is regulated in other countries, and speaking with other groups who are focusing on embodied carbon in the UK and elsewhere. And then we're also liaising with the Shadow Minister for Climate Change to gain support for EC regulation in government. Next slide, please. So yeah, we'd really like anyone who's interested to get involved. We're a sort of small to medium group. You don't need any prior knowledge of embodied carbon. We read a lot and we talk a lot about what we read, and it's a great place to learn more. And if you want to get involved, you can have a say in our net zero whole life carbon timeline. You can help campaign directly to the GLA and other local authorities, and we're particularly looking for people in other regions who want to get involved at a local level. And you can also help shape the case for embodied carbon regulation and just learn more about embodied carbon and how to calculate and lower it. Thanks very much. I'll pass on to the next person.
Thank you, Rachel. It's me again. So just to give a quick update on the campaign that we had on the permitted development rights 6-7 weeks ago. So these rights, as many of you are aware, came into force end of August, and once we were doing the research and the PDR campaign, we did find out that they had run a consultation, and the results of the consultation were all against the extension of permitted development rights, and the government did not take these into account. So I would really encourage you guys, if you could, if you haven't already, to sign our open letter. Tom, if you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So the slides have changed since. If you could go back, it's fine. So we have given. I'm going to put it on the chat box. We have given some templates to write to your MP using our template. And we would really encourage you guys to read our response in full, and we've written it in language that is understandable for people outside the industry as well. So we would really encourage you to share it with your family and friends who are not architects or in the building industry. And also we would really encourage you to read and sign our open letter to Robert Jenrick, which is in the link that I have sent to you guys. Now I'm going to pass it to Annalisa, which is who's going to talk about our next campaign.
Hi, so now the Planning Policies Group is focused on the white paper planning reform. So the deadline for this consultation is on the 29th of October. And ACAN's strategy is to write a response to the consultation, making sure that we're keeping the focus on the climate agenda, and saying that any reform should address this as a priority. So we've asked the various thematic groups to give input into our consultation response, and then we're going to be consolidating these to give like an overall ACAN response. So some of the questions require more of an opinion, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of harness ACAN's overall opinion. So if we go to the next slide, please. This is going to be the next breakout room, and it's looking at the first pillar of questions within the consultation. The questions are as follows: 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I recommend that everybody does is that you copy the link to the breakout room questions into a browser. So I think we basically have the reform spreadsheet into the chat box now. So each group will have a tab in the reform tracker tracker. If you go to your tab and you can populate your group's answers in that tab, it will be quite self-explanatory with a column, and the questions are written out again. So I think we're going to bring this down to 8 minutes breakout room. So yeah, we'll see you at the other side. I don't know if everyone has returned to the main session or can hear me. Right, so that I found really very useful, and just kind of having some other input was great to those questions. So I look forward to going through all of those eventually. Just to recap on next steps, we will be consolidating all the answers from within ACAN and publishing these online next Friday. And we really encourage that everyone uses the template answers to respond their own consultation response. And we'll also be drafting an open letter to cover all the issues that we think aren't addressed in the questions themselves. So look out over the next weeks. We will be broadcasting some more information about this. And now I'll hand over to Lauren and Joe.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So Joe and I are going to be talking to you about the organisational development of ACAN. Over the summer break, ACAN has been looking at how our organisation is structured and how it operates, with the idea to create a better model that can do more to fight the climate crisis whilst also supporting the network more effectively. As most of you know, we're an entirely voluntary organisation, and there's a lot of work that goes on in the background. Amongst the 15 to 20 or so coordinators, we've held strategy and organisational workshops with an external facilitator, looking at what works and what doesn't work and trying to define a new organisational structure. We have also at the same time been looking at formal legal structures and trying to identify funding streams so that ACAN can maintain itself more sustainably into the future. So watch this space. But for now, we wanted to share with you a bit of the reorganisation, as it means we have new roles to fill and more opportunities for new people to participate. We realised that the coordinators group were trying to do three things at once. We were all trying to coordinate groups whilst carrying out technical and administrative roles, and at the same time defining the DNA of ACAN as a whole. So what was happening as a result, the coordination group was frequently stretched and not doing our jobs properly and sometimes burnt out. So if you could go on to the next slide, Joe will take you through the new structure.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so for the reasons that Lauren described, we've put into place a new organisational structure that we hope will make the whole network more sustainable. And you can see this on screen now. We've created 3 coordinators groups. So we've got the steering group, which is looking specifically at organisational development and overall strategy, trying to tie our campaigns and events together and working to build and diversify the movement. We've got the thematic group coordinators. So these are the people that coordinate the groups, looking at different topics and campaigns, and I'm sure you're all part of these groups already. And the cause support coordinators. So these people will coordinate things like press and social media and the website and a lot of the infrastructure in the background. It's very few of them so far, but we've got lots of roles to fill. So the benefits of this new structure are that it will provide space for thematic groups to properly function. It creates a smaller steering group to focus on organisational development, and it creates more defined core movement support roles, so this work is visible and rotated and properly resourced. So we've created more coordinator roles, and we hope that these are better defined. And this creates more space at a coordination level for the active members of ACAN to step up, or for new people to step up if they think they're interested. And this will allow greater sharing of the overall burden of coordination without creating an unmanageably large group in the middle there. So we're looking for more people to help. If you could go to the next slide, Tom. Yeah, it's worth pointing out that we're actively working to address diversity and equality within the network. As a collective, our power comes from the contribution and collaboration of many voices and is strengthened by diversity. And we want to take this opportunity of expanding the key roles of the network to state our commitment to positive change within our network, as well as outside of it, in creating a more diverse and inclusive organisation. So we welcome all volunteers to join us and especially encourage those from currently underrepresented groups and diverse backgrounds. If you have any questions about that specifically, then get in touch with our diversity coordinator, Philippa Oliveira, via the general ACAN email, or you can private message her in the chat box. Thanks. So on screen, you can see the roles that we're looking to fill. So at the top there, probably should be in bold, the events team. You might have noticed that it takes a lot of people to put on these events. You need somebody to host and co-host, somebody needs to take care of the chat box, there's speakers to arrange, and slideshows and all sorts. At the moment, this is being done through an absolutely heroic effort, almost entirely by Eve Choi, with lots of the other coordinators helping out. But if you'd like to help put on these events, then contact Eve. I should say that somebody's going to post a document in the chat box now, and this has more info and contact details for all of these roles. So we're looking for a co-coordinator for the professional standards group. So that's what Alistair was talking about earlier, and you can contact Alistair to volunteer for that. We're also looking for an existing buildings coordinator. So that's what Sarah was talking about earlier, and you can contact either her or Emily Norman. And then we're looking to fill some movement support roles, and you can contact Sam Turner about these. So we're looking for people to help out with art and design, video editing, and digital content creation. We're looking for a digital infrastructure coordinator, which is somebody that helps organize our drive and the emails and all of our web platforms. Very important role that we're probably not doing properly at the moment. And more people for the website team. At the moment, we've got Richard and Hannah doing a lot of that, but we're looking for people to join them, so you can contact those two. And editors and writers. So if you're a writer, or you fancy yourself as a writer and you want to help edit our blog on the website, or write content for it, or write newsletters that we send out through MailChimp, then please do volunteer. These roles could be filled by any people anywhere in the country as well. You don't have to be based in London. This is ACAN UK. So click that document in the chat box and find more info there and contact details. And I will now pass over to Ben. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Some great chances for further involvement there, guys. And I hope that you'll all agree that everybody involved in everything that we've just heard about deserves a massive pat on the back for the incredible amount of progress that we've made in a year. We'll be and then we'll ping around. We'll be pinging around an email with all of them in. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm getting internet connection unstable. But even if you just want to test the water, join a group, go to a meeting or two, and you won't regret it. Everybody's really lovely, so yeah, get involved. So that brings us to a close. Thank you all for coming this evening to this anniversary meetup. Our next open meeting doesn't have a set date yet, but it will be an evening in November, so keep an eye out. And for now, we will be heading to our virtual pub, the Bishop's Arms. A link should appear in the chat for you to follow. Let's bring your own. I'm afraid we don't have anything on tap, but there will be plenty of good chat to compensate. So see you all there, and thanks again for coming.